on cycling, and particularly cycle tours, I find that you end up with some really positive experiences that seem to just generate themselves by virtue of your mode of travel, because you're vulnerable, you're exposed. You can go up and talk to people. People will come up and talk to you. There's no threat there.
That is Roff Smith, today's guest, sharing one of the many positive things that makes travel by bicycle so special. Roff is the author of the National Geographic book, 100 Bike Rides of a Lifetime, the world's ultimate cycling experiences. And he's got something for everybody today, from novices to experienced cyclists. You're going to hear his top 7 from the book and much more happening in this episode right now. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, what's up? It's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friends. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And our guest today, Roff Smith, he's toured all over the world. I mean, this guy's done a 10,000-mile solo bike trek through the Australian outback. That became a 3-part series for National Geographic and ultimately a book. He's explored Zanzibar by bike, ridden from London to Istanbul, followed the Danube, and pedaled the length and breadth of Britain. Needless to say, he's got a lot of biking experience. And what I love about this list he put together for you today is that there really is something for everybody. He's got some easier bike trips that anybody can do, but perhaps some more challenging things that you might want to consider, and some great stories along the way. Stick around at the end. You're going to hear what made me most excited about this conversation. You might catch on to it during our chat. Plus, I'm going to give a shout out to a listener and leave you with a quote to wrap it all up. Don't forget, before we dive in, zerototravel.com/newsletter. It's free and it goes out weekly. You can sign up for that over there to stay in touch off the pod. Now, let's get into my conversation with Roff. 7 incredible bike rides and travel experiences you can have around the world, and much more. Please enjoy. I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. I mean, you're Australian originally, right? So you guys know how to have fun.
Well, we do know how to fun. Actually, I'm quite a mixed bag. I grew up in New England in the U.S., but I'm Australian, and I'm now in the U.K. And in between, I've traveled. I've been around a lot of places. So.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, all right. So now I'm really going to try to hone in on the accent, because I've never heard an Australian, New England, English accent.
One of my publishers once told me she thought I had an accent from some county in England that no one's ever heard of. So,
I mean, isn't England the kind of place where that could be possible? Yeah. Because there are so many dialects and sort of.
So, I mean, I live on a narrowboat now, which is a canal boat. And at the moment, it's up in Yorkshire. I'm down here, so I can do all these interviews. But up there, there's so many different accents. Some of them are just really, really difficult to understand. You have to take a bit of practice.
I was traveling in Central America once. I was with my girlfriend at the time, and every once in a while, we'd get like a third person that would just kind of cruise along with us. And one of them was this English gal, and I swear, like, my Spanish wasn't that good, but I swear. It was way easier to communicate with the Costa Ricans where we were at the time than it was with her, because she had one of those crazy accents from England that I just couldn't understand.
When I first came here, I overheard some people talking in a shop, and I said to my wife, my wife's English, she's from here. I'm in Sussex, and she's from, and I said, are they speaking Gaelic? And she laughed and she said, "No, they're from Liverpool." And I just simply couldn't understand what they were saying. I mean, it was another language. I can understand them now, but when I first came here, no, it was
Where did you meet your wife?
in Australia. But funny enough, while I was cycling around Australia, I did a 10,000-mile solo trek around Australia in the mid-90s. And I just reached Perth after a very, very, very long slog down from Darwin, which is about 3,000 miles. And we encountered each other and we kept in touch and ultimately got married. And now we have 2 kids that are grown up now. And yeah, so.
Wow. All right. So was it one of those love at first sight, kind of like there was the instant connection thing, or
Quite an instant connection? Yeah. Well, we kept up, and it was just she was traveling around the world and had taken a year off of her job in London, and it was a 5-minute window in which we met, and had 5 minutes either way, we wouldn't have met at all. But that happened on a bicycle trip.
what do you attribute that to when the 5 minutes either way? Just serendipity? Are you a believer in what are your beliefs around that kind of thing?
Sometimes it varies. Sometimes I think things happen. You do get a sense sometimes that something is going to happen or has happened for a particular reason, and I think that well could have been one. It was a 5-minute window.
You have been on some epic adventures, so you must have had some pretty serendipitous moments along the way. Some kind of like, wow. I mean, has one come to mind? We're just like, wow, like this is too weird to be just coincidence.
Well, I mean, I've had a lot of really odd coincidences. I mean, I was in up on the summit of Mount Erebus in Antarctica. It's a really towering volcano, and I was with a volcanologist. We were standing on the summit having a bit of a chat. And he was telling me how he used to go to this particular summer camp in New Hampshire. And I realized that was about 10 miles from where I grew up at the time. And we started talking about the shops and everything and the hikes. And he would have been one of those camper kids that, us locals kind of, peered down our noses at, basically. But and we just had a bit of a laugh because we could remember the same shops, the same people, everything. And we're standing there on this on the summit of this towering volcano in Antarctica, talking about it. And these other people that were there were just staring at us like, But
how is that even possible?
Yeah, you just bump into somebody in places like that. But also, I think on cycling, and particularly cycle tours, I find that you end up with some really positive experiences that seem to just generate themselves by virtue of your mode of travel. Because you're vulnerable, you're exposed. You can go up and talk to people. People will come up and talk to you. There's no threat there. And you think about it in the movies. Other than Miss Gulch in The Wizard of Oz, have you ever seen the baddie on a bicycle? Doesn't happen.
That's true, yeah.
So you have this, these cyclists, and we're all perceived as kind of gently out of time or maybe a bit out of touch. And I've had so many positive things happen as a result of just being abroad on a bicycle. When I was cycling around Australia, I think one of the most interesting things that happened, most transformative things, I was pedaling along in the middle of the Gulf country, which is really, really remote area of northern Queensland, very remote. And I was looking forward to getting to this outback town called Normanton, where I was hoping to get a cold drink. I mean, I hadn't had anything, when you're on a bicycle, you've got the water that you're carrying with you, and it just gets lukewarm in this stinking heat. And it had been several days since I'd had anything cool to drink, and I was just looking forward to it. I had about another 40 miles to go. And this battered old Land Cruiser pulls up beside me as I'm pedaling along, comes out of nowhere. And the guy leans out. He's got a really friendly face. And he says, "God, I'll bet you'd love a cold beer right about now." And I said, "Oh, yeah, actually, I would." And he said, "Oh, do you want one?" And he had this mischievous look in his face. And I thought, is this guy just going to say, ha ha, and then drive off? I said, are you joking? And he goes, I never kid about beer, mate. Pull over. So I pulled over. He pulls over. And I realized there's a second Land Cruiser behind him. And there's 4 of these guys all together. Now, the guy who spoke to me was the local police officer. He's a police sergeant in this outback town. And he was about to get married. And his best man and his 2 uncles, they were going on, the 4 of them, off to this fishing expedition in some howlingly remote country. Anyway, we had a chat there on the roadside for a while, just drinking some beers and getting to know each other. And I said I was exploring the country on my bike. And Mick, who was the policeman, said, well, look, mate, you want to see the country? We're going places you'll never get on that bicycle. So why don't you leave your bike at my in-laws' place and come fishing with us? So I did. Spent the next 2 weeks in this really remote country. And I ended up going to Mick's wedding. And we have been friends ever since.
Oh, man.
In fact, the other day, it was a couple of months ago, I'm sitting here in England typing away. All of a sudden, I get this FaceTime call. And I was wondering, what's going on? And I tap it up to accept because I didn't recognize the number. And these same 4 guys, Mick and his 2 uncles and his best man, they were out camping. And Mick used his I think it was his police radio type stuff to connect. And I said, we're camping out and doing a bit of fishing, and we just thought we ought to invite you along, So I'm sitting here in my place in Sussex, reviving a friendship of 27 years, and it's these things happen, and I find them happening a lot when you're on a bicycle. So
yeah. That's beautiful, Matt. You guys would have become mates if, it's funny because he said, I'll take you somewhere that you could never go on a bike, but actually you ended up there because you were on a bike.
Yes.
You had to meet him in the first place.
Because I was on a bike. But where we went to these mangrove swamps and crocodile-infested rivers and it was a fabulous experience. I mean, they were lovely guys, and we had just a wonderful time fishing, eating hot, fresh barramundi cooked over a fire, drinking cold beers, camping very cautiously because there were a lot of crocs in those rivers. You really have to be careful. And something else also happened because I wrote a book called Cold Beer and Crocodiles about this trip. And this is about 10 years after that, so about 15 years ago now. I got this note from a German cyclist who found my email address, and he'd gone out, inspired by my book, which I was quite touched, to cycle around Australia, and he had done. And he was up on the Queensland coast, camped out, and he looked up one morning and saw 4 guys dragging a boat in off the sea. And he got talking to them, and he said he'd been inspired to ride around Australia because of this book. And the 4 guys looked at each other and started laughing. And they said, hi, I'm Mick, Tomo, Paul. Yeah, they were the same 4 guys. So naturally, they didn't let him get away without taking him fishing. And so it's these little things that happen that are just, they're quite delightful, really. And
oh, yeah. I mean, this is what life is about, right? Making these connections. And I mean, on the bike, as a means of travel, like you said, you get the opportunity to do that. You have more of those opportunities, perhaps.
Yes, you do. And if you're on a motorcycle, yeah, you're exposed and you see the countryside, but people don't come up to motorcycles, and you're going too fast anyway. I mean, if you're going on a bicycle, you're just going slow, and you're really quite vulnerable. But that same vulnerability opens you up to experiences like this. I was riding in England, going up over. I saw a shortcut. I was riding the length of Britain from Land's End to John O'Groats, and I was going through the Lakes District, and I saw this shortcut, squiggly little line. And I thought, oh, that'll cut off a bit of distance.
Beware of the squiggly line.
Absolutely. I don't know what I was thinking. So I saw, and it turns out I found out this road is called the struggle to Kirkstone Pass. It was literally,
Oh, yeah.
and
The name says it all.
25% grades. So
Oh my God.
So I'm cycling up this thing with my touring bike. And I'm having to lean over the handlebars to keep the bike from flipping up in my face. And I come around this bend, and there's two old elderly couples with a nice car. I think it was a Bentley, parked on a lookout. And they had a picnic table set up, a little folding table with a silver service picnic. And they're looking out over this stunning view of the Lakes District. The woman calls out to me as I'm lurching around the corner, "You must be famished. Would you care to come and join us?" And so halfway up the struggle, I led my bike against this cobbled stone wall. And next thing I knew, I was hoeing into a pork pie, and someone's pouring me a very nice French red wine. And so that was part of my struggle to Kirkstone Pass, which turned out to be more of a struggle after I ate that big meal. I can tell.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Again, it's those kind of experiences that happen when you're on a bicycle.
That's the thing. And when you wake up, you don't know they're going to happen. And you're in the middle of the struggle or whatever, insert whatever thing. And the next thing you know, you're sitting at some stranger / new friend's dinner table eating a hot, delicious meal.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. These things, one of the things I learned from my big trip around Australia, the 9-month jaunt, I was in no hurry. I was staying in Aboriginal camps, going off on fishing trips, staying on cattle stations and sheep stations. And the overwhelming thing that I took away from that trip was that the vast majority of people are good. They really are. You meet a few real jerks, but you don't even like to give them the time of day or time of thought, because the overwhelming number of people were good. I had so much kindness extended to me, and it was kind of redemptive kind of thing. You realize that it's a pretty good world.
It restores or renews your faith in humanity if you need that, or just reinforces it, perhaps, could be the other thing, depending on the attitude you're going in with. One of the three, perhaps. This book, we're going to talk about 100 bike rides of a lifetime. I'll hold it up so people can get the visual here that are watching. I don't know if you brought some of your favorites here. I was wondering if you could share your 7 favorites from this book, because we have 100. We can't do 100, but we can choose your 7 favorites. And I was thinking, well, this could also be a good opportunity to kind of maybe take like a broad view of like the types of experiences you can have, and then who might be better suited for one or the other. Because I'm sure there's some people listening, like somebody listening might have been cycling all over the world, and another person listening might have never even considered, doing anything bike related in terms of travel. And we're not going to sell you on it here, but we can share the experiences you just heard. I think some of these routes can be a good starter point for having some of those discussions, getting some like tips and advice and things like that too.
Sure. Well, like I said, with the book, I tried to have a mix in the book of everything. So someone who's an expedition cyclist will see something they like, someone who's a mountain biker, or there's routes there that are family friendly for like just the kind of people you mentioned who might not have considered going on a bicycle, but there's some in there that are quite doable and beautiful rides, not just, but enough of a challenge to make it accessible adventure, if you know what I mean. So I've tried to put a mix in there. And so if you're looking about the 7 favorites, shall I start from the 7th and work my way up?
Yeah, let's kick it off and work it down to your number 1. I know now we know this list could change every day.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But
it's a fun exercise. We like to do a countdown here.
That's okay. Now, the first one I'm going to list is one that I've not done, and frankly, I'm never going to do.
Okay.
But it fascinated me when I was doing the research. I am not a mountain biker. I'm on the road, I touring on roads and mountain biking. I just, I've got way too much imagination to want to go hurtling down a mountainside on a bike. It just, I can just, anyway. But one I came across in the research for this and fascinated me. I mean, if you're into mountain biking, I would have to think this would be a truly spectacular experience if you survived. Well, the whole enchilada in Moab in Utah. Apparently, it's about 27 miles. during which time you plunge 8,600 feet down a high mountain pass to the banks of the Colorado River. And you pass through all the ranges of ecosystems, down precipitous, rock faces. And I was looking at the pictures of this and talking to people who've done it. And you have this sort of almost kaleidoscopic sense of color, of red rock and flowers and dazzling, violet vistas as you're looking out. You start off at this pass at 10,000 feet, and you ride up another 1,200 feet before you start plunging down. And it just sounded like an amazing experience. But I mean, I don't have that skill set. And but that was a route that really stuck in my mind from when I was doing the research.
Have you been to Moab? It is such a fun place to mountain bike.
I've seen the countryside. I've just
This might not be for everybody, the whole enchilada, but I would encourage everybody, if you get a chance, to go mountain biking in Moab. It's spectacular, awesome town, just such beautiful scenery. There's so much to do outside of biking. I love it.
Yes, I mean, I gather that there's a lot of it's a whole mountain biking kingdom there, basically. And there's something there for everybody. That was one ride. I spoken with a lot of mountain bikers, and a lot of them kept coming up with that. You say I wanted something there for everybody in the book. And although I don't do mountain biking, that doesn't mean that, So, but that was a ride that really stuck in my mind. That I thought, wow, I mean, if you have the skills, that would be fabulous. That was the first time I ever came across this really interesting phrase: high risk, high consequence. I hadn't heard that phrase. And it just spoke to me. I thought, okay. But that did it's one of those ones that stayed in my mind from when I was doing the research.
Yeah, that's great. What a great way to kick it off. I like that high risk, high consequence. It's like you expect, a balance there. High risk, no, high consequence too. Don't fall on that 8,000 foot plunge. That's great. All right, cool. What's your number 6?
Okay, number 6, I've done bits of, but not the entirety of. And that is the Underground Railway route. That's a ride that tells its own story. I mean, a lot of bike rides go from point to point, and that's the whole point of the ride. Well, this is you're riding through history, and you're following basically. The route was quite well researched by the Adventure Cyclists Association. And, it roughly approximates the route taken by enslaved people to escape. And it goes from Mobile, Alabama, up to Ontario, about 2,000 miles. And it just, you cut through this wonderful swathe of America following a route that has a historical significance. Now, I've done little bits of it, but in the course of the research of this, I spoke with a guy who not only had he done the entire route, he went and did it a second time. He liked it so much, and I got the idea he would do it again. And this is a guy who cycled all over the world. He's a very, very experienced cyclist, and he absolutely loved it. And I did that as a long haul cycling project. I mean, it sounded. I mean, I've done, let's say, bits of it. I would love to do the whole, get the whole feel of, from Mobile up to Ontario. That would really, that's something that stuck in my mind as a favorite. Something I would love to do. Say I've done bits of it, but I'd love to put the whole thing together.
So, is a trail like that? I imagine it's pieced together in various ways, right? Like you might have some bike paths, you might be on the road sometimes, you might be on an old railroad track area, that kind of thing. Is a route like that, I mean, I know we're just speaking about this one specifically, but there are a lot of routes like that. Are those hard to navigate?
Not so much. I mean, some of them are, some of them are really well signposted. Others, you need a decent map. There are maps available for this. And so, no, it's not that hard. You mentioned the trails, and I guess one of the ironies of the Underground Railway path is once you get to Ohio, it's almost all following the Overground Railway They're almost all old rails to trails paths, which does keep you nicely off the traffic, traffic-free roads. So it's not that hard to navigate. It's a nice mix of things. So
Yeah, that would be a big selling point for me. The trails that will have a blend of a lot of things we're going to talk about today, but also, if you can be off. I think that's one of the scariest things for people when you think about traveling by bike, of course, is getting hit by a car.
It does. A lot of people find that very intimidating. It can be quite. I've noticed since the lockdown. I have a fairly robust attitude towards traffic, but I've noticed even since lockdown, there's a much more aggressive sense in the roads than there was maybe 5 years ago. But a lot, where possible in the book, I've tried to get routes that where we're as much traffic free or low traffic as possible. There were several lovely routes that I've done in the past that I didn't put in the book because they just the level of traffic kind of spoiled it. But this particular one, there's a whole swathe of America from south to north. It's pretty friendly, and it's something that can be done over. You don't have to do the whole 2,000 miles in one hit. You can do it, over vacations over several years if you like, and see the whole of it. Be very well worth. It's a 2,000-mile route, but that was a favorite one that you research and you kind of aspire and think, I'd like to do that. So so I've touched on bits of it, mainly in Ohio, but I've not done the whole of it. But that appealed very much.
Sounds incredible. All right, number 5. Are we going to leave America yet? The USA?
Oh yes, absolutely. I'm afraid we're leaving America for good now. Sorry.
Oh, we are. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So long.
The other another one is the Canal du Midi in France. Now there's several. I have several French favorites. The high passes in the Pyrenees from the Tour de France. There are some absolutely gorgeous passes there. The Col d'Aubisque is beautiful. But I think I've mentioned earlier, I live on a narrowboat on the canals, and so our English canals are we've got 2,000 miles here in England, and not so much. Well, they have plenty of canals on the continent too, but this canal, the Canal du Midi, is 17th century. It's one of the really earliest of European canals. It may even be the oldest. And it stretches right across the heart of France down to the Mediterranean. Follow this towpath. You're going through some lovely old cities, wine country, and it's along a 17th century towpath. Some of it's kind of rough, bit overgrown because
but it's flat.
Well, that is one of the really appealing things. Yes, it is flat. Because you're following a canal, and this is where the horses used to pull the canal boats, and so it's some of the places they've maintained the path quite well. Other places they're working on it. There are parts of this you definitely want a gravel bike for, or at the very least a light tourer. But it's a really beautiful ride. And not hard. It's very achievable adventure. Again, you don't have to do the whole length of it. You can do whatever you'd like.
This is one of my top personal choices. When I got the book and then I was thinking about the rides that I want to do, it was a canal ride in France, because it just seems like that's something I could take my kids on. It seems manageable, right? So, all right, let's just take that for an example, and this will tie in with a logistical question before we go to number 4. If you are going on a trip like that, that's not, let's say it's not super technical, right, compared to some of the other ones, would you bring your own bike if you were flying in, or would you go and try to find a bike there? This is always the question. I've asked other people this as well on bike related shows. I'm just curious, you have so much experience. You've written this book, 100 Bike Rides of a Lifetime. General advice on that.
I've always brought my own. Not always. Generally, I've brought my own. Usually it's not been that big of a hassle. Um, some airlines are, are quite easy in terms of, taking your bike. Others, will want to charge you the earth for it. Yeah, it's good to check it out first. Um, I have rented bikes on my assignments for National Geographic. If it's possible, I often will do rent a bike locally, as opposed to a car if I can, because it's just fun to get around that way. And so I've ended up doing some cycling in some really odd spots in the world as a result of this. But uh, I like to bring my own where I can. It is difficult. And if you're for example, in Europe, you can just put your bike on a train and then go somewhere, same as you can here in Britain, which does make it easier than trying to fly with a bike. But I tend to bring my own, and it's not that difficult. But,
Okay. Yeah, you have a comfort level with your own too, of course. There's that. And yeah, it's been, I mean, outside of touring or travel experiences like we're talking about today, it's been really cool to see the bicycle share movement. I know in Oslo here, where I live, we have a great bike share program where you can, it's not the kind of bike you go and you don't go on like a long trip with it, but it's just to get around the city and stuff like that. And now they have these all over. And I mean, that must make you happy as an avid
yes.
cyclist to see.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I've in places. I mean, I did a story on Polynesia once years ago, and I've ridden on quite a few of the islands across the Pacific, because you get to these places and you just rent a bike and explore.
Go.
In fact, that's actually a segue into one of my next favorites is in the
All
South
right.
Pacific. Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
What is it?
Ovalau in Fiji. I kind of discovered that by accident. I was on the island. It's a quite a historic island. Back in the 1870s, 1860s, Levuka, which was the capital of the island, was known as the wickedest place in the South Pacific. It was where all the whalers and the riffraff of the ships. I mean, it was quite a wild town. And eventually they British colonial authorities moved in, decided to clean up the place and made it settle down a fair bit. But I went there and I rented a bike. And Levuka now is a beautiful old historic town. I think it's a World Heritage area. All these old false front buildings from the 19th century, the old colonial era hotels. It's like you've stepped into a Somerset Maugham novel. And it's just lovely old-fashioned kind of feel to it. So I rented a bike, and it's about 35 miles around the island. Fairly challenging, and it's hilly, and of course it's hot and steamy. But it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, Fiji is one of these places. It's like the friendly jungles. There's you're in proper jungle, but there's nothing nasty in there. There's nothing poisonous. Nothing. Nothing's going to bite you. You're not going to pick up malaria. It's this lovely Garden of Eden kind of jungle that you're riding through. So it's it's got the lovely feel, and people are very friendly. Just did a lovely loop around that island. It was just very calming. Just really, I remember coming down one of the valleys. It was on a Sunday, and I came up, crested this hill, and there's this village down below. You can hear the church bells ringing and the sound coming up from the valley in this beautiful tropical landscape. I mean, it was absolutely a lovely ride that is stuck in my memory. So when it was time to do this book, that was I wanted a nice diversity of places, and I thought, well, here we go. That's definitely going in. And
yeah, I love that. Yeah, well, that's great because also you, of course, you hear about France and you hear about a lot of these places, but you don't often hear a recommendation from a tropical island like that.
Yeah.
I'm smelling the smells, kind of the tropical island smells, as I'm putting myself there.
It was lovely, and I finished up and I went back to this old hotel that was dated from the turn of the century or turn of the previous century, and you just had a nice quiet drink, and it was just absolutely a delightful ride. And Ovalau is very it's an island. It's not far from the main island, Nandi. So it's quite a short hop by plane to get there. And there was, I rented a bicycle, and it was I didn't have my own there. I just rented one, and it was absolutely beautiful and definitely one of my favorites.
Love it.
Something that's stayed.
Thanks for the recommendation. I'm glad it made the list.
Yes.
All right. We're in the top 3 already,
Yep.
which seems insane. But
This next one is one I did when I was on my very big ride around Australia. It's almost an Australian rite of passage, although not on a bicycle. It's to cross the Nullarbor. And that's the Nullarbor Plain. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a 100,000 square mile arid limestone escarpment that Null Arbor. It sounds like an Aboriginal name, but it's actually Latin. Null Arbor, no trees. It is absolutely desolate. And if you're Australian, it's almost like a rite of passage to drive across the air highway on the Nullarbor Plain. And when you hear people talk about it, it's a bit like Texans like to talk about size and big things. And to hear the descriptions of the Nullarbor, you would swear that they're talking about a 5,000 mile drive, because people, I was going.
it has a mystique in a way.
It has, yeah. People will swear that they were doing 100 miles an hour all day and all night, and you think, no, that's impossible. You couldn't have. But it's about 750 miles, which is big enough. It's just long enough, and there's not a lot out there. But if you're going in a car, it can seem kind of tedious after. It's almost like a sea journey. You set out on this, and there's this empty landscape. On the road, there is a 91-mile stretch where there's not a single bend in the road. It's dead straight. World's longest stretch of dead straight highway. Now, there's about some miles north of the highway, quite a few miles north of the highway, through the heart of the Nullarbor, there's a stretch of railway tracks that's nearly 300 miles without a bend. So we're talking about a big and empty place here, but on a bicycle, you're going slow enough that you're seeing there's wildlife out there, little birds and wild camels from the days of the camel trains in Australia in the 19th century. So you leave Norseman, which is this rather rugged West Australian mining town, and there's this sign, and there's nothing for 1,200 kilometers, about 750 miles. And when you're setting out, there's like a little archipelago of roadhouses, which is they're a bit like petrol stations, but some of them have rooms you can stay in. But there's only a few of those, so it's anywhere from 100 to 150 miles between these points. So you've got to be carrying your own water, because there's no surface water out there. It's
you did this?
Yeah.
This was part of the solo.
This was a part of the.
This is pretty insane, man.
You have to be.
How much water do you have to carry? This is a major. This is a sort of like an expedition. Then it's less of a.
Yeah, this. It's not as tough as actually coming from Darwin down to Perth. That was much tougher. But at the most, I was carrying 23 liters of water. So that's 6-7 gallons, something like that.
And that gets you through the whole 700?
It doesn't get you through. No, it gets you from one water hole to the next. The temperatures out there, when I was there, temperatures hit 120 one day. I didn't the next day, but
is that why do you put yourself through that?
Well, if you want to get around Australia, that's what the weather does. The juxtaposition between that and imagining pulling off from my not tired legs from a French canal and entering a bistro and getting a croissant versus pedaling in 120-degree heat with no trees. Well, that's a kind of natural segue to the next one on my list. Actually, you brought it. You introduced it beautifully.
Okay.
The next one on the list. We'll forget the howling wilderness of the Nullarbor Plain, which the first explorer to cross it described as a place you get into in bad dreams. But to the Welsh National Trail. It's got a Welsh name, Lôn Las Crymw, and I am sure I have butchered the Welsh. I can't pronounce it, but it's basically the Welsh National Trail. It goes from Chepstow up to Holyhead. Chepstow, an old castle town on the English-Welsh border in the south, the Holyhead at the tip of Anglesey in northwestern Wales. This was the first bicycle trip I ever did where I went on B&Bs instead of camping. And what luxury. I would pull into this nice homey little B&B, and then the next morning you have this full Welsh breakfast with the lot. I mean, it's heart attack on a plate. It's a couple of fried eggs, a couple of sausages, some bacon, some beans, some mushrooms, some tomato, some fried bread. It's just it's total heart, and it was absolutely delightful. Now the trip across Wales, you go over 3 mountain ranges. Now, Welsh mountains are not high, but they are very steep. So this is not an easy ride by any means. But boy, is it civilized. I mean, you can stop at these little B&Bs, get a nice shower, get out of the elements, because this is Wales. There will be elements, believe me. And but the countryside that you go through is literally where the term picturesque came from. In the late 18th century, this was where a lot of the famous landscape painters, J.M.W. Turner and that lot, they would come out there to paint these beautiful landscapes. And they became known as picturesque because they were the ones you would see in the pictures. And that is literally where the term came from. And it truly is beautiful. I mean, you ride up from Hay on Wye, going up this gorgeous valley to Gospel Pass, which is the highest road pass in Wales. Only 1,800 feet high, but you feel it. I mean, it's steep going up there, but the view off the escarpment up there is absolutely stunning and worth every crank of the pedals. Then you come down and it's lovely. I mean, and you also, if you're for bragging rights, if you can pronounce the name, you go through one of the world's longest place names in Wales. It's 88 letters long, and I can't even start to pronounce it. It's most consonants.
Really?
Yes. Just when you cross this very famous, one of the world's earliest suspension bridges into Anglesey, very famous bridge made by Thomas Telford in about 1819, and you come into this town with it's worth this. You pull off just to go to the train station. You need a wide angle lens to get the whole name of the town on this. It's hilarious, and you get one of the locals to pronounce it for you, and which they rattle off like anything. But no, it's a lovely ride, and truly is one of my all-time favorite bike rides that I've ever taken anywhere.
Wow. Okay, that's saying a lot, and it's funny because we going from the world's longest stretch of straight road to the world's longest named town across the world's almost longest suspension bridge.
Yes,
I love the variety, Roff. I love it.
Who doesn't like superlatives? Yes.
Well, I think this is a good example to use as a benchmark for budgeting, because when somebody's taking a trip, like, let's use this one for example, where you're staying in B&Bs and you're kind of pampering yourself in between rides, let's say, versus kind of the camping, which we all know we can spend pretty little when we're camping. But for something like this, just rough ballpark kind of estimate. We won't hold you to it because obviously it's going to vary around the world. But
prices change.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get...
what are you spending per day, maybe?
Probably about 100 pounds.
Yeah, that's what I was guessing.
Yeah. That's what, 130 or something US dollars, I guess, something like that. $100. I mean, if you go on to do youth hostels, I mean, there's a lot of places, a lot of ways you can economize. And one of the things about, like I was talking about, those huge Welsh breakfasts, you have one of those in the morning and you really don't need to eat the whole rest of the day, even if you're riding, 60 miles through mountains. Those breakfasts will really set you up. So the B&B is very good value for the for your money.
Yeah, I mean, have you utilized a lot of I imagine you've because you have hostels, you have places like warm showers, the communities where people will put you up. You have B&Bs and those types of things. You know, you can do Airbnbs. There's a lot of ways you can do it.
I've tended to either use the B&Bs or camping. Sometimes kind of stealth camping, if you catch my drift. Just sort of waiting till it gets dusk and dipping into the woods and making a little camp. And but there are there are lots of ways you can travel economically, and a bicycle is really is a wonderful way. Particularly Wales is just lovely. I mean, a very special part of Britain for sure.
Now I'm very curious to hear your number one after
Okay,
seeing
number
this,
one, the Danube. There's a stretch of the Danube from Passau in Germany to Vienna in Austria. Now, Passau is right on the border with Austria, so basically it's almost all Austria. It's about 200 miles. And I've ridden the entire length of the Danube, starting from the Black Forest to where it goes down into the Black Sea. So I've done the Danube a lot, but this particular stretch, it takes you through some absolutely epically beautiful countryside. It's a immensely popular. It's a bicycle path along the river. Most of it's traffic free. It's an extremely popular path in Europe. So, although it can be quite busy in the summer, but not hectically busy. The towns along it are all completely geared for cycling. That's it's a very popular path. So everything is set up for you ride into these villages and you'll see a couple hundred bicyclists and maybe half a dozen cars moving on the street. It's very, very cycle friendly. The scenery is gorgeous. You go through the Wachau Valley, these terraced vineyards, these castles overlooking the river, fabulous monastery at Melk. And the path itself is so beautifully laid out. I mean, you're following this grand river through these idyllic European, it's like a European cycling idyll, actually. You could easily imagine you're cycling in some, lovely golden age where you're just pedaling along and you're seeing these onion dome churches across the river. There's plenty of ferries to cross the river. The path runs on both sides. So if you want to be on one side where it's maybe a little wilder, or maybe you want to be where there's more villages, so you can stop off at some of these lovely little the Austrian pubs. I say Bavarian because the part of the river before you get to Passau is also quite beautiful as well. But it is an absolutely, and it's very well marked. There's little series of guidebooks that are very, very handy with big scale maps. I mean, it is incredibly cycle friendly. Now, I have seen families doing it with really small children, and they're doing the whole length. They're doing the whole 200 miles. You do it over a series of days, but there's plenty of hotels, B&Bs. Everything is geared for cycling. And I've seen, again, families with the grandparents as well. The grandparents are in their 70s or 80s. They're doing it as well. It's basically flat. There's a little rolling in places, but no more than rolling. No steep hills. And you just go along until you get to Vienna, and the path just sort of guides you into the city. And Vienna is a very cycle-friendly city. And it just sort of guides. You don't even notice that you're coming in through a big city, and suddenly you're in St. Stephensplatz in the heart of downtown. And of course, Vienna's got all these fabulous old cafes. Their cafe culture is it's World Heritage listed in its own right. So you can finish up with these grand old finish your ride at a grand old cafe with some Turkish coffee and some lovely strudel. And no, it's absolutely idyllic. And I've done it 2 times now, and I would happily do it a third without any question.
Okay. So wait, how long is the actual
200
route?
miles from Passau to Vienna.
200 miles.
Almost exactly. And again, you don't need to bring your bike there. There's loads of outfitters in Passau that will supply you with a bike, and you can even arrange to have your luggage transported from hotel to hotel. Your booking is all made. So you don't have to tour with a whole lot of panniers. Just bring a day pack or whatever, and your luggage will be moved to the next hotel. It's all so well geared for bicycle travel. So it's one of those things that it's an adventure, but it's achievable adventure. So those people you mentioned earlier who might like to try cycling or try a cycling adventure, highly recommend that. You really can't go wrong. It's lovely. I mean, really lovely.
Wow. Okay. And that's why it's your number one, I guess. Epic list.
It is. I mean, I'm not averse to challenge. I mean, I'll do the Nullarbor Plain. I have done it, and I've done tougher rides than that out in the bush. But this was just so idyllic. It was really, really pleasant. And done it twice and would happily do it again.
It seems to me that just based on some of the research I've done on your work, I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, writing for National Geographic, photography, traveling to over 100 countries, essentially globetrotting and making a living from your travels. And now it seems that, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you've found this comfort exploring at home. I know you have on your Instagram, it's travels at home. You're taking these beautiful pictures where you're, who knows what hours in the middle of the night you got to get up to set up, and you take this kind of lone shot of yourself, but you can't really, you're sort of nondescript, and it really puts people in these scenes, and all these scenes are near where you live. And also I know you had an article on The Guardian about staying home and how your world expanded. I'm just curious, for you as somebody who has traveled the world doing this for a living, getting the opportunity to write and take photos around the world for National Geographic and other publications, how has it been? Are you in a transition right now in your life where you're just spending more time at home, wanting to be home, or?
Yeah, very much so. It started I came here just before the lockdown, literally before the lockdown. I'd finished shooting a series about the Panama Hat Weavers in Ecuador, and came here literally hours before everything locked down. And I had nowhere to go, obviously no work because I couldn't travel anywhere. So I was just I started putting my tripod and taking my cameras with me on bike rides. We were all, in the lockdown, we were all rather confined to our local areas. You could go out for a bit of exercise, and that was about it. So I was kept within about a 12-mile radius of home. And I started shooting my rides as though I was shooting a magazine story. With myself, I mean, I was using myself as a model. I would set the tripod up and ride into frame. And it really taught me to start looking at where I lived in a different way and with fresh eyes. And you realize that you don't really need to get on a plane to go up halfway around the world to see something new. I mean, there's scenes I shot here in Sussex, within a few miles of my home, that could look like they're on a rainforest track in Fiji. There's another scene I shot I remember coming across the coastal marsh with a red sun, boiling hot red sun coming up. And you could imagine that was in the Serengeti. I mean, it was a very African-looking feel to it. There is so much that you can see and experience within your own home area if you just travel with fresh eyes. And a bicycle is perfect for doing that. And so after a while, I really got into this. I wanted the pictures. I mean, although I'm the model, if you will, in my pictures, I didn't want these pictures to be about me. I wanted to be about a cyclist on the landscape, so someone looking at them could imagine themselves out there. I've had a lot of really positive feedback from that, and people have started looking at where they live and realizing that you can travel at home without going anywhere. And so now I'm living on a narrowboat, which is an even slower means of transport than a bicycle. I mean, a narrowboat goes about 2.5-3 miles an hour on our 2,000-mile canal network, which I'm going to be exploring. So I've actually even gone slower and more local, and I'm really happy doing that. If I could explore Britain. I mean, there's so much to see in Britain that I could explore this for the rest of my life without any problem and still feel I hadn't scratched the surface.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that you Yeah, for you, a lot of your work, I imagine, of course, you're going out, you're having to document, you're having to set up your camera, and then to come home and to treat it as if you were traveling. It's almost like a trigger. You know, if you're starting to get into that mode at home, then you're almost consciously and unconsciously putting yourself into the travel mindset, because you're doing the things that you do out on the road. You're just doing them at home and snapping yourself into that. I think that's a really interesting.
You hit the nail on the head. You know what? I would go out and I would feel some of the same kind of jaunty expectancy that I used to feel. Oh, I'm heading off for an assignment to wherever it is, in some far side of the globe. I would feel that same kind of expectancy and excitement about traveling off to the wheel 12 miles away, because you're just going at this different pace and seeing things. It's discovery, and it was quite an eye opener.
Having traveled so much, I know it sounds like you have raised kids, and obviously you were traveling a lot for work. I was just wondering if you had any regrets around the traveling that you did. We focus on the positive of traveling here, but it is healthy, I think, to look at some of the, everything comes with a cost, right?
It does. It really does. I've been lucky, and you have to. When I've been traveling, yes, I've been away for a long time. But when I'm not traveling, I'm here all the time. So it was quite. I was one of the few fathers, for example, that could be going along on school field trips. Because if I'm here all the time. And but then when I'm not here, of course, I'm gone completely. But I regularly went on school field trips as one of the chaperones. And I was the only father I ever saw doing that. So there's that advantage. And my kids learned some geography, some really interesting geography. I remember my youngest daughter at her nursery school. They were showing pictures of different things. There was a picture of a lighthouse with a red and white striped lighthouse. And someone said, "Does anyone know what this is?" And my daughter raised her hand. She said, "That's the South Pole." And the teacher just laughed and said, no, it's a lighthouse. And she thought it was funny enough that, when she saw me after school, and I went to pick my daughter, I said, "You won't believe your daughter said that was the South Pole." And she said, "I know that's the South Pole because I've seen my daddy standing by it." And I said, "Well, yes, she actually has seen me standing at the South Pole, and there really is a red and white striped pole there with a little silver ball on the top." And so, yeah, and I remember, the same daughter climbing up, and she was, imagining being on a pirate ship and setting sail to Tristan da Cunha, which is a very remote speck in the South Atlantic. And she knew about this place because I'd been there. And her geography teacher didn't know about it, and so there was advantages to it in some ways.
Sure, absolutely. No, I was just curious, for your personal journey, how that's been, and are your kids travelers now? I can imagine you inspired them to.
Yes, they've traveled a fair bit, and one of another advantage, I guess, talking about assignments, my eldest daughter was she just finished a degree in art history and literature, and she came with me when I did a story on Stonehenge. And she ended up becoming so interested in Stonehenge, she's now finished a master's degree in archaeology. She's turned her entire career around. So, and she's about to start a PhD. So it has had its advantages in terms of broadening horizons, but yes, both the kids are travelers.
What did you study?
Well, really useful stuff. I did my first degree was in geology. I did a master's degree in Old Norse language and history, which was, as you can imagine, very useful. But it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed. I read the sagas in the Old Icelandic and quite enjoyed it. I've always been into writing and literature, and very much.
Yeah. What drives you to explore?
I've always been, since I was really tiny, always been keen on exploring. I remember, those Dr. Seuss books. One was I had trouble in getting to Solace Solu, and it's meant to be rather a moralistic thing about, someone's always seeking some great, perfect world and keeps going. And he finally learns that, he shouldn't do that. He should go home. And and that whole moral was lost on me. I was so disappointed when he turned around and went home. I wanted to keep going. I didn't care about the adventures. I wanted to, And so I've always had this, desire to do this. And funnily enough, my first bicycle was just a watershed. But something that really changed my life was in the May 1973 issue of National Geographic, lobbed on our doorstep. And in it was a story about 4 cyclists who were doing the Alaskan Highway. Now, this was the first summer I was actually able to get out on my bike and was allowed to go places. And I was already imagining myself going all over the world on my bicycle, because I couldn't see why you couldn't. If a road could go there, I could get there on my bike. And so suddenly I see this in National Geographic. Yeah, I mean, what I was guessing was, it really was. You really could do it. These people were riding to the whole length of the Alaskan Highway, and they were going to go all the way down to South America after that. And that, made up my mind. I wanted to cycle the world, and I wanted to work for National Geographic. So both of these things eventually came about. It took a while, but
how old were you?
I was 14 at the time, and
wow.
Yeah, well, I was so besotted by this. I mean, I read that article. I can still, to this day, picture the remember the pictures in that story. And funnily enough, when I was about 17 or 18, I wrote to National Geographic. And I dreamed up this idea. I'll cycle around Iceland. I thought that would be fabulous. And this was before anyone ever went to Iceland. Iceland was a really obscure destination. And I thought, oh, this would be great. So I wrote off to the editor of National Geographic and told him, here's a great idea, and I'm willing to volunteer myself to do this. And, it was a sign of those times. My letter was not ignored. I got this very lovely letter back from him saying, sounds like you've got some, wonderful ambitions. And it was a really encouraging letter. He said, I encourage you to go out and see the world, go into journalism, get some experiences, then come back to us. And it was a lovely letter. And I'd forgotten pretty much all about it. And, I went it was good advice, and I followed it, but not really intentionally, just the way my life panned out. I ended up going into journalism, and I was with Time magazine. Then I quit my job there and did my cycle trek around Australia, which became a 3-part series in National Geographic. Now, I had mentioned at one point when I was talking to them about doing the story, that I had written once before, and this was, anyway, when I just finished, I finished the ride around Australia and got to the Sydney Opera House, and there was a photographer there, a guy I'm still friends with, a guy named Ian Lloyd, and he was there with a letter, a sealed letter. He said, Bill Allen, who was the editor-in-chief at the time, asked me to give you this. And I said, okay. Well, he had gone and found my old correspondence in the archives at National Geographic, and quoting from that original letter that I'd had, wrote me this beautiful, really lovely letter. It's taken a while, but you've done it, and it was really, really touching. And he had, this was right at the end of a 10,000-mile trip around Australia. My first story for National Geographic, and to this date, the biggest bicycle ride I've ever had. And it was just lovely. I mean, a really, really lovely thing for him to do. And I was deeply touched.
Wow. I can imagine bursting into tears right there.
It was quite emotional. He just looked it up and sent this letter. It was really, really kind. And yeah.
Do you remember when you actually got I don't know at what point during the bike ride, before or after, or I guess it was before, or what time, how far before, but you got the notification that you were going to be working with National Geographic, and then your 14-year-old self was now fulfilling your dream? Was that a big moment for you?
It was a certain sense of, I knew they were interested in the trek that I was doing. They were, I think, skeptical at the start. I mean, could I actually do it? 10,000-mile ride around through the bush, and so I'd send a photographer out to join me periodically, more on spec than anything, just in case. And by the time I got to Perth, about 2/3 of the way around, it was pretty obvious that I was actually going to make it and I could actually do this, and so I knew they were going to do the story. And then by the time I got to Melbourne, which was really close towards the end, they had said it was going to be a 3-part series in the magazine. I believe their first ever 3-part series. And so, yes, it was I was
No pressure.
No pressure. No pressure.
But you delivered. I mean, it ended up being an award-winning series, right?
Yes,
And that
yes.
started everything.
That
Congratulations.
launched me into I've been contributing to them for 27 years. And on a wide variety of topics. And they've been very good to me. I've gotten to see a lot of the world, and they've been kind of a gold standard. I mean, they actually lived up to my 14-year-old hype that I'd imagined. They actually lived up to it, which is again something quite nice.
Yeah. Wow. Congratulations. And you've done. It's amazing to hear. It's inspiring, when you hear somebody had a dream and they fulfill it, and not that it's easy. There's no shortcuts or whatever. There's bumps on the road, as they say. But
well, my
really,
brother
really
and I,
cool.
we've often talked to my younger brother. There's only 2 of us, but we talked about the time we were sitting under this little bridge in New Hampshire. We were kids, and his dream was to be a pilot. He wanted to be a pilot, and I wanted to travel the world for National Geographic. And we were talking about all these things, bold things we were going to do. I mean, 2 little kids in a remote little spot. I mean, there's like zero chance you'd have sworn. And, my brother flies corporate jets all over the world now, and he has done for years. And I've been doing my stuff for National Geographic. And we still every now and then talk about the old, the conversation under the bridge.
I love it. The conversation under the bridge. That's a good reminder, I think. Don't let, if you still have the same dreams that you had as a child, then I don't know, maybe we should all be careful about letting them go too easy. Just let's not let society beat them out of us like it tends to do sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And that's something that I've been something of a lesson on the bicycle as well. I got back into cycling, like most of us, you give up cycling when you get that first car and you kind of move on to other things. And I was in my 30s in Melbourne, and there was a tram strike. And I still had a bicycle, and I didn't know how else to get into work. So I thought, well, I'll just drag the bike out and knock the cobwebs off. I hadn't ridden in 10 years at least, and rode in through traffic the next day. It was scary, but at the same time, it was quite exhilarating. And so I kept on riding. And then next thing I knew, my commutes became the most important part of my day. I was leaving an hour earlier so I could explore the city. And, I was working at a city newspaper, and we all fancied that we knew our city really well. Didn't even begin to know it as well until I started cycling through it. And that kind of opened up my eyes, and I began thinking, well, wait a second, what have I been doing all these years? And that just started leading one thing to another, and it's ultimately led to the big bike trip around Australia.
Amazing. What advice would you have for somebody who wants to build a life around travel? And I know it can mean a lot of different things. Maybe they're not doing it nomadically or anything like that, but perhaps, but just, you want travel to be a big part of your life. And what would
carefully.
You say?
Think carefully. I mean, it's so different now than when I was starting out. Any advice that I might have, the things that I did when I was starting out many years ago. I mean, it's just a different world now with social media, and the world is smaller. It's it's so different. I would hesitate to. I mean, I guess believe in what you want to do. I suppose taking a really broad brush, if you have a dream, then go for it, and be willing to take the risks, which there will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not high risk, high consequence, but high risk, high reward.
No,
high risk, high reward.
I'll leave the mountain bikers to do the
or
whole,
low risk, high reward, ideally.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave the mountain bikers to do the whole enchilada. You can do the whole enchilada figuratively in your mind by taking these other risks. And
right.
Following
going back to your number 7, the whole enchilada. And
yes.
Yeah. Well, 100 bike rides of a lifetime. The world's ultimate cycling experiences. Such a cool book. I thanks for sending it along, and now I get to go through and read your top 7 because I'm going to read all about them.
And I hope you'll give some a try.
Yeah, we'll link up to your Instagram too in the show notes because I want people to check out the pictures. I think they're lovely. The pictures of you out there.
I put a lot of work into those.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it sounds like it from the reading I did on your website. And yeah, do you want to share? I mean, you have a personal website and everything. You want to share where people can...
The Art of the Ride. It's also accessible under Travels at Home. And again, I put a lot of work and a lot of effort into creating these kind of romanticized images of cycling. And because that's how I feel about it. It's a gentle escape into a slower paced, easier kind of lifestyle that, you can visit at least on a bicycle for an hour or two before coming back to the hurly-burly of the 21st century.
Do you have a favorite quote you'd like to leave us with, or a saying or an anecdote?
Gosh.
I mean, you're a wordsmith, so...
Yeah. Well, there's always Mark Twain's little quote, because he was learning to ride bicycles when they were first invented. Get a bicycle. You will not regret it if you live.
There you go. That's a great way to wrap this one up.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Hope we can stay in touch and do a ride out there somewhere.
Absolutely. I hope so.
Together.
Yes. Take care now. Thank you, Jason.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
There you go. I want to thank Roff Smith once again for stopping by the show. Thanks to National Geographic for helping us set this up. 100 bike rides of a lifetime. I love a good book like this where you can flip through and just dream, perhaps add to your bucket list, and just think about some of the adventures that you might want to have in the future. I was glad that he was able to pull 7 to share with you today. And I mentioned at the top I was going to share something that got me really excited about this conversation. There's an overarching concept to this, but I will say when he mentioned that Danube cycle path, we talked a bit more about that off the podcast. After we stopped recording, we got into a conversation, this path that runs from Germany to Vienna, Austria. And what's cool is that there are ferries that run right along this path. So if you get tired, or like same with my kids and they just can't do it that day, you can hop on the ferry and go to the next place. So you could book all your accommodations, you could plan it all out, and if anybody gets hurt or bails or doesn't feel like doing it that day, there's an alternative that can still get you where you need to go. And this was what excited me, because whether it's this cycle path or something completely not related to cycling, could be any type of adventure you're thinking about or planning, perhaps with a spouse or a partner or yourself or a group of people or your family, whatever. This idea that you can whittle it down to perhaps adventures, if you need that comfort level of, hey, what's like the secondary plan? What are some things I could do that could put me out of my comfort zone, but if I'm unable to complete them for the day or something happens, there's an alternative way to get to the next place. And so I can have this experience, but it's not completely overwhelming. And I think that that's an exciting idea, right? You think about some adventures where you're just kind of like, you're in it to win it. Like you go on it and there's kind of no turning back. There's no alternative plan, but you can also if you're listening and you've thought about maybe doing something more extreme, whatever that means to you, but you want to have a little bit of an outlet to have like a secondary plan, those exist and you can plan those out in that way. And chances are you probably finish the extreme adventure, but sometimes it's nice to know there's a fallback plan. So anyway, just wanted to share that as an overarching concept for those of you out there looking to take your travels to a more uncomfortable or more, I guess, a different place, something that you're not used to, maybe to go back to biking. Maybe you've never done a bike trip before. So having that as your first one, something where you can have a fallback plan might be a good introduction to it, is all I'm saying. Okay. Just wanted to point that out. And don't forget, sign up for the newsletter, that's my email, jason@zerototravel.com. You can email me, of course. But if you want to keep in touch, the newsletter, zerototravel.com/newsletter, you can sign up. I want to give a quick shout out to Devin, who, speaking of emails, wrote me an email recently, said, "Hey, Jason, big fan of the podcast, been listening for a little over a year now, finally making the jump to full-time travel with my girlfriend here in less than 60 days. The podcast has helped me get everything in order. We're doing a 3-month road trip around the U.S., then heading to Asia to start our extended travel adventure, planning on doing a minimum of 8 months in Asia before moving on to other parts of the world. Thank you for bringing the content that you do and all the tips I've learned along the way. P.S. We're trying to keep this extremely budget-friendly, less than $1,000 US a month per person, and we're going to work remotely as we go. Thanks a bunch. Can't wait to hear about more adventures from the pod." Devin. Okay, there you go, Devin. Big shout out to you for making the travel dream happen, for getting out there and doing it. I'd love to share these stories because we're all a community here. Y'all are listening and somebody else in this community is making the travel happen. And it's always nice to kind of share that, put it out there, and to continue to inspire each other and kind of keeps the momentum going, keeps the snowball building, so to speak. So if you have a story you want to share, a tip, anything, it's all about sharing here. I even have a section in the newsletter of this podcast where we have community features. So I'm always excited to feature people in the community that have something they want to share with everybody else for inspiration or that's helpful, resources, whatever, anything. Feel free to share. Let me know, and I'll do my best to share that out with you on the pod. Okay, I'll leave you with a quote to wrap this up on, of course, on bicycling. This one's from Mehmet Murat Ildan, and this is so true. I read this and I was like, this is true. Here it is. Every time you miss your childhood, ride on a bicycle. That's the quote. I grew up riding bikes. I mean, knocking on your neighbor's door like, "Hey, you want to go ride bikes? Cool." And there is something childlike in a way about getting on a bike and just going for a ride, and extrapolate that out into like a long journey. Perhaps we get an extended trip of childlike wonder along the way. Who knows? So every time you miss your childhood, ride on a bicycle. Leave you with that quote. You can go on a ride today if you'd like. Thank you for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.